Is this thing on? Today I'm going to be sort of getting deeper into my desire series, which again is going to focus more on sort of sex than most other sort of motivations that people have. I think I'm going to do a whole series on motivation, and so the desire will be contrast to that for sort of being more sex and relationships focused. So, the topic today, heteronormativity, oppressive or adaptive. So what is heteronormativity is what I'm going to answer, and then sort of present arguments why it could, to me, it's actually both oppressive and adaptive, but by necessity, it's both oppressive and adaptive. So, what is heteronormativity? Why it's oppressive? Why it's adaptive? Heteronormativity. Heterosexuality within the human species is considered the norm. But not just heterosexuality, but committed monogamous heterosexuality. Now, relationships don't always last forever, and people rarely sort of marry the partner that they first meet. So saying that it's fundamentally a monogamous species is incorrect. We're not fundamentally like a singular pairing species. However, in most democratic cultures, as well as many sort of egalitarian aiming, sort of more socialist cultures, the goal is actually more monogamy. It's sort of influenced by monogamy, particularly in Christian majority cultures. Monogamy is a preferred form of long-term relationship, heterosexual monogamy, and then sort of you get into polygyny or polygamy. Polygyny is sort of men dating multiple women at once, and it doesn't necessarily have to be marriage. And then polygamy is when the man actually marries multiple women. There are some Muslim majority countries where that is more practiced, but not all Muslim majority countries actually are polygynous or polygamous. So monogamy is actually popular even with non-Christian majority countries. So that is an equal element of heteronormativity. So heteronormativity, most people ought be heterosexual, most people ought be monogamous. That's what essentially what heteronormativity is. Why it's oppressive? First, particularly of other sexual orientations. Many cultures that want to promote heteronormativity do so by legally repressing homosexual behavior. And some argue homosexual behavior is a perversion of human nature. I do not take that stance. I do not argue homosexual behavior is a perversion of human nature, primarily because it has existed in many cultures throughout our existence. Homosexual behavior exists in many species. It's not just humanity that practices homosexual behavior. And again, it's not most common. So that is the first oppressive element of heteronormativity is cultures that legally oppress homosexuality. So the legally would be if homosexuality is illegal. So if homosexuality is illegal in a country, that means that they are heteronormatively oppressive. But even then, there are countries where homosexuality is legal that some people say that even their homosexual behavior is still strongly socially discouraged. Most sort of former European colonies, most Western democratic democracies have made homosexuality legal for about 50 years now. It's been the case that homosexuality is illegal in most Western democracies, but only roughly 10 to 20 years or so that homosexuals were able to get married. And sort of Christians do find more offense to homosexuals getting married. Christians in general aren't as opposed to homosexuals existing, but they are opposed to what they consider marriage between one man and one woman, and the idea of sort of homosexuals getting married to them is abhorrent. And that's the other element of heteronormativity as oppressive. And then the last being sort of those who want to live a more promiscuous lifestyle. And there's reasons why promiscuity is not as adaptive, and then that's where I'm getting into the heterosexual. So, the heteronormativity being adaptive, and it's a good bridge between the oppressive and the adaptive, sort of those who want to live more promiscuous lifestyles and have multiple sexual partners. Those think monogamy is an oppressive thing, and men tend to typically want more sexual variety than women do. So, why is heteronormativity adaptive? Well, let's first address the promiscuity side. Jealousy is an adaptive trait within the human species. And I'll be getting into it in my next book review, not on YouTube, but on Substack. But jealousy being adaptive basically says those who were jealous were more likely to succeed in producing genetic offspring than those who were not jealous, because of things like infidelity, things like extra mate pairings. Those who were jealous made sure that those things rarely happened, whereas those who weren't jealous, it did occur. It's more for men than it is for women, because men have to ensure their own paternity. Women can still often, depending on like if they have any sort of genetic issues, can reproduce by virtue of being a woman. Sometimes they have genetic issues that make it difficult to reproduce themselves. So the first sort of it being adaptive is monogamy helps reduce jealousy, especially if you're in a committed relationship. But also, jealousy also helps enforce monogamy, and that again sort of is the oppressive side. The next element is related to how people reproduce. The reason I think most cultures tried to make homosexual behavior a antisocial behavior is because survival was not a guarantee for most cultures. Survival was a task. You had to do many different things on a day-to-day basis in order to survive. And so, only men and women had the ability to reproduce. You needed a male sperm joining a female egg. And so the idea of between heteronormativity being adaptive is without technology that could allow for a non-copulation event to occur and still produce a pregnancy. Pregnancy required copulation. And as a result, it was more normative to ensure that the population continued to reproduce by promoting heterosexual behavior. And it still exists to this day, particularly in countries that don't have a lot of resources, but the thing is that they're having more and more babies, so it's not as sort of a crisis point, I would say. And homosexuality, to me, has no bearing whatsoever on birth rates, particularly in sort of developed countries with democratic values, respect for women's reproductive rights. Homosexuality has very little bearing on the decline in birth rates. My analysis of the decline in birth rates, it's primarily birth control, followed by abortion, followed by late marriages. And I put birth control ahead of late marriages, which sort of is a little bit of a sort of kind of not as popular position, because people say, oh, it's late marriage, it's economic reasons provided for not having children. My theory is if birth control didn't exist and abortion didn't exist, those rates would be above population replacement rates, because accidents would happen and people wouldn't be inclined to prevent those accidents. It doesn't necessarily mean it would be good for society, but it would increase those birth rates. But the thing is that at this point, you can't really do that ethically to take away women's reproductive choices, particularly in birth control and abortion. So, yeah, that's here to stay. But overall, heteronormativity is both oppressive and adaptive. And it was born out of situations where we had to do things to make us survive as a species. But perhaps there will be technologies, there will be ways to make us more inclusive of this species and be able to still have good reproduction of the species in order to maintain economic progress. And I still think it's both adaptive and oppressive, but overall there are ways to find new ethical paths that we can explore. And that's the purpose of my channel, is exploring those ethical paths through digging into the past and finding ways to change it. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. And I will see you in the next one.